generations, which has turned it old and made it a haven for the inhuman things of the world to lair in. Creatures that have hunted humanity for generations are drawn to this place, for the cumulative history of this land whispers to them and invites them home. New creatures, too, find haven here, a respite from the struggle to survive in a world that they don't quite belong in yet. But now I am told the land is becoming ancient, a nexus of lore and age, a wellspring of potential, and whatever lays claim to it can shape it to their will, for good or ill. Many ancient places in our world, they belong to gods and demons, and all the great and terrible things we tell ourselves are mere figments of the past so that we can sleep better at night. My land knows otherwise. Also, we let people camp here. If you're new here, you should really start at the beginning, and if you're totally lost, this might help. Thanksgiving is going to be uncomfortable this year. I called up a family meeting to discuss the ancient land problem. It was the most unproductive meeting I've ever run in my life. Normally I try to keep things moving and cut off unproductive conversations, but people would just not move on. In retrospect, perhaps I should have handled it differently. Toss the land is turning ancient, like a hand grenade, and then dismiss the meeting for a week to let everyone digest it. Instead, I gave them that update at the beginning and then naively tried to move on to my proposal on how to handle it, and we spent 2 hours in what I can only describe as hand-wringing navel-gazing denial. None of them want to accept that the land is turning ancient. They questioned my sources, insisted that Bo was lying to me even though I don't think he's ever lied to me, and then we got stuck on why the lady with the extra eyes had to die for a while, and finally it all broke down when someone remarked that maybe if I weren't such an asshole I could have resolved things peacefully. I lost my temper after that, told them that I owned the land. Was the reason none of them had to live in the main house with the little girl, and the beast waiting for their blood every night. And that the land is turning ancient, and that this was how I decided to handle it. The last 15 minutes of the meeting was spent with me outlining the plan to a room full of hostile silence, and then I dismissed the meeting because it was clear no one was going to provide productive commentary. Holding meetings is hard, y'all. It's even harder when you've got some kind of blood relationship with everyone in the room. Oh yes, I guess we're calling the man with the skull cup bow now. Thanks for giving me something I can barely type. I've had to put a sticky note on my laptop. I'm not sure if it's his name, but maybe if we just all go along with it, it'll become his name. I don't have a better plan. Anyway, my brother wasn't at the family meeting. I called him after and told him the gist of the plan. 2 days later, he invited me over for dinner. So I got to see my niece. That was cool. And his wife was there, and while I was holding my niece, she went for the throat. You have to make this work, she said. You have to make the land safe for her. I told her I would. I didn't tell her or anyone that the final step to this is that I die. It's a sobering thing to think about, picking your death. I've always assumed it would someday be the beast. I see it in my nightmares, when the thing in the dark passes by and we all dream of what lives within its heart. Such an easy decision, when the only consequence was my own cessation. Fight until that inevitable misstep. The land cannot go to the beast. A creature of inescapable death cannot become an ancient thing. There is enough cruelty in this world already, so I have to choose. While I have no intention of giving up until I am satisfied with the life I've lived, I am also practical enough to consider a backup plan in case I don't get my wish. I'm not sure who I'd pick if I had to choose right now. Don't trust Bo quite yet. Barry seems uninterested, and their fondness for hunting concerns me. I have enough alcohol-related problems already that the dancers seem like a poor choice. Visitor from rule number 1 wouldn't be that bad of a pick. I could think of worse things to govern this land than hospitality laws. The master of the Grey World is also on my list, though I wonder if it isn't an ancient thing already. The entity that shows up when a relative dies seems benevolent, so it might also be an option. I have no way to get it to show up other than murder a relative, which really isn't feasible. Though after the disastrous family meeting, I gotta admit that it's tempting. I admit I'm kind of in a murderous mood this week. It was really hard to not do something awful because A, it would fix the problem, and B, if I'm interpreting Perch's message right, then that Stitch isn't holding me back anymore, ... It starts with someone that has clearly read my posts. If you're reading this one, you know who you are, and I hate you. On the whole, the people who camp here are decent folks. I'm sure I might think otherwise if I got to know them better, but the majority are alright. I'm likely giving you all a slanted view of my campers because I only talk about the worst of them. For instance, the kind that feel they're somehow smart enough to get away with anything. The sort you look at and think that, ah yes, this is someone that needs a swift punch to the teeth by Madam Consequences around here. She wears brass knuckles. While our big events are all done with, getting an influx of people on our open camping weekends, which are every weekend now, while the weather is nice, we should finish the season with just enough money to get us through the winter. Obviously, I really need things to go well between now and when winter hits. So when someone decided to help out by taking matters into their own hands, I was pretty displeased. I got a call over the radio from one of my staff. They sounded terrified, which was alarming as this wasn't one of my seasonal hires, it was a full-timer. My full-timers are reliable folks. It takes a bit to rattle them. Someone tried to drive off the children, they said. I've had some camps yell at the children with no wagon before. They don't react. It takes either persistent refusals or ignoring them to get them to leave. This individual threw a bucket of water on them, my employee said, and the children had screamed like banshees and fled, shrieking the whole way down the road until they vanished out of sight. I told my employee to stay put. I'd be right there to talk to the person responsible. He was camping alone, his tent located at the edge of the deep woods and far from other people. I will refrain from describing the individual because I don't want to start a witch hunt. Suffice to say that he had a punchable face. I know that I was biased at the time, but I really do think you'd agree with me. He had the kind of face that just begs for a black eye and a broken nose. I kept my temper in check and asked what the hell he was doing, and why I shouldn't evict him from the campground right then and there. Oh yeah, well, I read your posts and I figured if the children were unbaptized undead or something, then maybe a bit of holy water would get rid of them. He sounded rather pleased with himself. My temper snapped. I think I said something about how he was to pack his shit and get off my land, only with a lot more profanity, and then I stalked away before I did something really regrettable. I almost made it to my four-wheeler before my mind calmed enough to come up with a rational, better idea than mere eviction. I turned around and went back to where he stood forlornly by his tent, apparently confused as to why I wasn't thanking him for his assistance. I stalked right past him, stuck my head in his tent, and swiped his car keys before he could realize what was happening. I dangled them in front of me. He took a step towards them, and I fixed him with a stare intended to remind him that I had killed people for less, and I would do the same to him if he tried anything else. Please stay with me, I said. You get them back when you pacify the children with no wagon. You caused this problem, so now you get to figure it out. But don't mind me, I snapped. You were clever enough to figure out the holy water, right? So now you get to figure out this problem. He followed me to my four-wheeler, protesting the whole way. Didn't I see how they ran off? It had worked, obviously, right? I ignored him and left him to contemplate his bad decisions. Then he showed up at my office like 2 hours later. The children were still around. He said nervously they were following him asterisk. Asterisk, I said that yes, of course they were, and that he'd better figure something out before they skin him alive or something like that. The nice thing about him having read my post is that I don't have to pretend to be nice. That thing with your great-uncle giving them candy, would that work? He finally asked. Did you miss the part where I said my uncle embellished his stories? I snapped. Why don't you try it and see what happens? Which is really the polite way of saying fuck around and find out, so I guess. Well, I wasn't the one doing the murdering. I really wasn't trying very hard to keep him alive. Either he went to the camp store and bought a bag of saltwater taffy, bad choice, and then someone found him a few hours later staggering down the road, mouth agape, skin turning faintly blue. The Hermetics have a good response time to our campground for obvious reasons, so they got here in time to clear the mass of taffy that had been shoved down his esophagus and restore oxygen before he died, which is a bit of a pity. because it would have nicely solved the problem. Or maybe not. They were pretty pissed off about the holy water ... Anyway, the hospital cleared him for release and I was there in the parking lot to pick him up. The hospital staff have learned to look the other way when I show up to the hospital with my shotgun. I always have a very good reason. On the drive back to the campground, I explained through clenched teeth that buying ice from them was an invitation to do mischief on the campground, mischief that, according to the other inhabitants, would escalate into violence. What he had done was attack them. They were angry. They needed appeasement. Then I dropped him off at his campground and went to do more important things, like review the registration of everyone on my land to figure out how long they were staying. I admit that I had some ulterior motives for keeping that idiot around. If the children with no wagon were preoccupied with tormenting him, then perhaps they'd leave everyone else alone long enough for them to pack up and go home, blissfully unaware of the danger they were in. Turns out it worked. Around midnight I got a call on my phone via the emergency number. Any guesses who it was? Anyone? They're outside my tent, he whispered frantically. That's great, I replied, and then I hung up. I tried to go back to sleep. I really did. But I guess I've got a conscience now. I blame all of you and it might not be that strong. But it tries its best and I just couldn't sleep. Because I kept thinking of what could happen if the children got done tormenting him and went after the rest of the campsite. I got out of bed and went to the garage. I didn't even bother to get dressed. I reserved the courtesy of pants for people that haven't pissed me off. This guy got the privilege of dealing with an angry Kate in pajamas. Not many people have reached the point where they've used up all my fucks and I have none left to give them. I drove out there and stopped the four-wheeler along the road. The children were gathered around his tent, which glowed from within from the light of a lead lantern. I could see the outline of the camper huddled in the middle of his tent. Round the nylon structure were the children holding hands and walking in a slow circle around it. They were singing Ring Around the Rosie, I think. Their laughter sounded like the shrieks of hyenas when they got to the end and fell down. I'm not sure if that's an inhuman trait or just what children sound like. I called him back on my cell phone. Yeah, I'm at your campsite, I said. They're not bothering anyone else. But what about me? He said wildly, clearly frightened. They've been doing this for hours. I dunno, I replied. You're out of holy water, aren't you? I guess you're in for a bad night. Then I hung up and left. Harsh, yes. Look, I find people largely tolerable on good days. My interactions with my campers are brief and so I don't get to know them well enough to learn their annoying quirks. The rest of the time I'm dealing with people that are either complaining to me or causing problems for me. I don't really have any patience left for someone that decides to do the supernatural equivalent of using gasoline to combat a forest fire. I did try at least one thing to help the situation, only because it was conveniently on the way. My route home took me past the thing in the dark. I haven't talked to it since the branch incident. Honestly, I've been a bit afraid to. It seems to have made a bargain with me as it let me leave with the branch, but I've been nervous that I may be mistaken or it might have a timeline in mind for when I must return to the great world. It's an irrational fear if my ancestors' death is any indication, as they lived for many years after they killed the First Lady with extra eyes. But I feel a little paranoia is warranted, right? I have left it offerings, food, drink, flowers, small trees. I just kind of drop them and run. They've all vanished, so I think that means they were accepted, but I'm not sure if that means I'm forgiven, Perhaps it was the lack of sleep from being woken so late at night, but that was the moment I decided to find out. I left my four-wheeler on the road a healthy distance away from the thing in the dark's mound. I really don't have money left in the budget for another one. I tentatively crept up to the pile of debris, every nerve in me screaming that I should flee at the slightest movement. I can understand why the senior campers swear that the mound breathes. My mind was racing with adrenaline and for a moment I thought I'd hallucinated that exact thing, that the mound had shifted, and I froze like a mouse hiding from the hawk, my gaze fixed on the pile of sticks and leaves, not even blinking. Only when I convinced myself that it was my imagination did I continue forwards, until I was at a respectful distance in which to hold a conversation. So the children are angry again, I said. I've asked you about them before and you told me to remove the person that started it. But I was thinking maybe I'd try something different this time. Could I remove the children instead? Nothing. I waited for a minute and then a minute more, and finally the quiet of the forest started to get to my nerves, and I felt it was really best if I just left. The forest shouldn't be this quiet at night anyway. It was a bad sign. Perhaps because the children were angry and released from whatever holds them in check, or perhaps something worse was nearby. Either way, best if I got to the safety of my house. I turned to go. Can't, the thing in the dark rumbled as soon as I had turned my back. The ground beneath me lurched and then softened to a faint trembling as its voice quieted. I'm sorry, I asked, not turning around. The children. It sounded like a sigh, and this time the ground barely stirred beneath my feet. I thought that was rather considerate of it and felt a pang of guilt for stealing that branch. So I can't get rid of them. You can't. I cursed under my breath. The thing in the dark has been a reliable source of information, so when it says, I can't get rid of the children, I'm inclined to believe it. I mentally slated that as a problem for another day. Perhaps they couldn't be removed, but they might be able to be contained or reduced to a less dangerous state. Hey, I just wanted to say, I said, about the branch. It was my intention to apologize. However, it seemed the thing in the dark was having none of that, for it interrupted me mid-sentence with a dull rumble that sounded like an avalanche of gravel, tumbling towards me. Leave, the thing in the dark bellowed, and the ground rose up beneath me, throwing me bodily forwards and almost pitching me face first into the ground. I'm going. I shrieked as I caught my balance, and then I hauled us back to the road. So I guess it is angry. At me. Good to know. It wasn't too long before I realized that I was being followed. I let up on the gas so that the engine noise subsided. The unnatural silence of the forest made it easier to hear the giggling that came from the trees around me. I cursed under my breath, the laughter of children. Seemed that they weren't entirely occupied with their chosen prey and were willing to pursue a more interesting victim. Or perhaps it was the bad year that motivated them, an unconscious desire to kill me that they didn't fully understand, or maybe they're just assholes, they're undead demon children after all. I floored the gas on the four-wheeler, thankful that I knew this road well enough to dodge the potholes even in the dark. I had no desire to find out firsthand what kind of mischief the children were up to tonight. I don't know the full abilities of the children. I only have a theory of what they even are. I think we're very, very lucky that it takes a precipitating event to release their power upon my land. I was seized by hands. Dozens of invisible hands closing on my shoulders and arms, wrapping fingers through my ponytail. They yanked backwards, pulling me off the back of the four-wheeler, and I landed hard on my back, stunned by surprise. It had been so sudden, I barely had time to register that anything was touching me. Then they began to drag me backwards down the road and towards the darkness of the trees. Meanwhile, my four-wheeler continued blithely on, expending the rest of its momentum until it veered off into the ditch and hit a tree. I think this says a lot about my priorities, but the main thought in my head as that invisible presence dragged me backwards along the road was how much was left in the budget. For four-wheeler maintenance, it's not totaled, at least. I took it to someone in town that works on cars. They think they can fix it. Then I was being dragged through the woods and I twisted, trying to flip over onto my back. I shielded my face with one arm and reached for my knife with the other. My fingers closed over the hilt and I drew, flailing wildly with the blade at whatever held me. The knife only met empty air, and the laughter of the children all around me echoed in my ears, mocking my futile struggles. A sharp jerk pulled me up into the air by my ponytail. I screeched in pain and kicked wildly, heart pounding, and I slashed back and forth, up and around, trying to connect with anything. Then something slapped my hand, something immense and strong, and the knife was knocked out of my grip and it tumbled off into the forest somewhere. Haven't found it yet. I got my staff and we scoured that entire area and still didn't find it. I'm conflicted about how I feel about this. Granted, it's about the only weapon I've got for when guns don't work, but it was also made out of my gray tent. So maybe it's time I find a different weapon. I don't know. Seriously, don't hassle me about this in the comments. I haven't actually given up on finding it. The children tied me to a tree branch with my ponytail. I swear I about blacked out when they let go and it was only my hair holding me up. The jerk sent agony through my skull and for a moment it was like the world went dark and then I was thrashing on instinct until my hand slapped against the bark of the branch and I was able to relieve some of the pressure on my hair. Beneath me, the children joined hands and began to circle. They sang. It was not Ring Around the Rosie, it was a song of their own invention. Mother's buried us deep, so her secrets we will keep. Bring us a blanket, made from the flesh of man, under which we can sleep, for our mothers buried us deep. I remember the warning from Bo, he warned me, for we cut down the people the children had left hanging in the trees. That next time it'd be just their skins that we found, blankets made from the flesh of humankind. I held very still, my arms trembling with the effort of holding myself aloft enough to keep my weight off my hair, slowly trying to not attract their attention. I lifted a leg and hooked it over the branch, then another, just enough to stabilize myself so that I could remain there until they left, which wasn't until dawn. And that whole time I was clinging to that branch, shaking, hoping that they had no intention of carrying through with their promise of skinning someone alive. Because I had no weapon and was tethered very firmly in place, it was a long night of contemplating my own mortality and cursing the irony that landed me in this position. But dawn came and they ran off into the woods, giggling like this was just the best game. And I guess it was for them. They left me hanging there by my knees and hands, my hair firmly knotted around the branch. One of my staff making the mid-morning round around the campground found me and was able to help get my hair untangled. They cut the branch and once I was on the ground we were able to get me loose. It was worse than the time someone stuck bubblegum in my hair in 4th grade. It wasn't until noon that I got back to my house and got myself cleaned up. Just stepped out of the shower when my phone started ringing. It was the camper ... You had better have solved this, I said through clenched teeth. I did, he replied. I thought about what you said about appeasement and I got them a gift and they seemed really happy with it. I bought them a wagon. You did what? I screamed into the phone. For a moment I stood there, seething with blind fury, and struggled to find the right words that would convey that anger in a way he'd understand the full weight of it. A screaming, incoherent profanity can be cathartic. It's not a very good way to communicate that I had told him to fix the situation, not to save his own skin and make it worse for everyone else. Also, I told one of her staff that I'd lost my keys and someone had returned them. I was supposed to pick them up from your office, but that you weren't in at the moment. So they helpfully got them for me. I'm miles from the campsite and I'm never coming back. He hung up. I didn't want to throw my cell phone at the wall because those things are expensive. So I went outside and angrily chopped firewood for a while. I should have enough to last me until spring. I'm tempted to pull the wagons from the camp store, but I think that might be a little despiteful. I'm a campground manager. I'm starting to regret these posts, both because they're turning my land ancient and also because they've apparently given some people ideas. When this all started, I thought that if people knew, if they were educated, then perhaps the world would be a little bit safer. No, the numbers actually are better this year, despite everything that's happened. Maybe that's because of these posts, or maybe it's because everything is trying to kill me, instead of the people that camp here. I guess it can't be helped. What's done is done. I just have to keep moving forwards. I'm not changing the rule about the children. I've had to reprint the pamphlets twice now, and the camping season is getting close to an end. The children still have their creepy stares to scare people off, and people tend to not buy ice this time of year anyway. Just get a bunch of cheap flyers to hand to people with their registration warning them not to buy ice from children at all. Maybe next year the children won't be around. I know what the thing in the dark said, but I'm still going to search for some way to deal with them ... On my office wall is a list. It is all the entities on my land that are a threat to humankind. I hung a red marker next to it so that I can cross them out once they've been eliminated. The family meeting was to decide how to handle each of them. It breaks tradition, We've never tried to fight these things. Doing so invites disaster. That's what my family said, ... Screw tradition. This land is turning ancient and everything is changing. It's a long list, but I think I know where to start.